Today we are going to create this formulary on Webflow. Let's do this. So I have my project created, and prior to get started dropping blocks in here, dropping elements in here, I will try to evaluate what is going on this design. So on the one hand, we are having this left area that is containing our actual form fields, and on the right we're having this content area with a few icons and text. Also, we're noticing that on mobile we are having the create an account item at the top. Then we are having those items that correspond to what is on the right for desktop. Alright, let me get this color coded with blue. Okay, and next we are having our email field, followed by this text with this checkbox over here, and finally the details and the create password items. So what we are going to do is actually to have a top element that will contain only our headline, like this. So this headline over here will get to be this headline over there on mobile. Next, the blue area, or this green blue area, is going to follow like that, and finally the rest of our form will follow on mobile that corresponds to our left side on the desktop design. So this analysis being done, let's get hands on it. First, I'll create a div that I'll call section AIW, perhaps number 1. A section on which I will drop my 3 elements as follows. I will actually create a new section named main grid AIW number 1 that I will use with this grid layout property to have my 3 areas. Alright, so on the top I will have, let me just show you. Perfect. So on the top I will have my top main area like this. Following, I'll have a main, or say left main area over here, and finally I will create a right main area in there. Perfect. Now I am noticing that this area over here is taking approximately 2/3 of the space on this grid, so I will try to reproduce that result. Oh, sorry about that. In here, I'm going to use something like that. Perfect. Now, my grid is done. However, I am taking into consideration that this layout over here should have sort of a limit of growth when appreciating this on very large screens. So what I will do next is to create a container that will limit how big this can get. So we'll create this a container number 1, for which I will set a max width that will correspond to, let me tell you, to approximately, oh, I'm having this block over here that I can use, approximately 1400. So I will set this to be space centered 100% width, but with a limit of 1400. So that is my container, and inside of that container I will drop my main grid. We are almost there. So what follows now is I am going to create margins for those elements. I'm going to use approximately 15 pixels for margins, and I'm going to create those inside this section, main section over here. Even perhaps I can do approximately 1200 for this specific desktop breakpoint, and I can get this a little bigger on the following breakpoints. So let's go for the easier of those three main elements, the headline. Inside of my top main area, I'm going to call this area just for the sake of consistency. So inside of this top main area element, I am going to drop a headline for which I am going to set a name that I'm going to call top headline number 1, and for which I'm going to set my margins both on the top and bottom to 0. I will check that this is 32 pixels and it is bold for size. So I'm going to set 32 pixels. I really like to use EM for the height of the size of a string of text. So I'm going to use 1.3 EM as the size. EM is a proportion of the size of the text, so that if this size of the text is changed, the height of the line will be still a proportion of whatever that new number is for the size. I'm making sure this is bold, and let me just get this. Oh, I copied and pasted the wrong string. Okay, let me just copy and paste this over here, and voila, we're having a create account item. Now we're having approximately 40 pixels distance between those two elements. So I'm going to use this over here on my grid. I am setting the distance using the grid because of, well, it is a grid. I could do differently if I set this to 0 and I manage the distance as the margin of this top main area, but it is kind of the same. I'm very used to use these grid properties for distancing the elements inside. So next, I am going to work on this area, for which I am going to drop a formulary item like this. So you cannot create inputs in here if you do not drop a form block at first. So I'm dropping up a form block. I'm actually going to delete everything inside for the sake of getting some clear space in here to work more comfortably. And I'm going to set names for my elements. So this one I will call form block number 1. And the element inside the form itself, it's going to be named form number 1. That's just for convenience. Now I'm going to set background of this to transparent, as well as I'm going to do the same over here. And it's not going to take any color until I drop elements inside. So here we are, perfect. Now what do we have inside? We're having this area over here, sort of a headline on which I am asking for the email, right? We are having an additional one over here with more details. We're having another one for a password and a final one with a create an account button. So I am going to create those 4 sections for my formulary over here. The first one will be form first a W number 1. The second one will be form second number 1, form third number 1, form fourth number 1. Perfect. Let's go for this over here. I'm having those elements. A email that is taking up to this half of the size of the general container. Next, I'm having a few strings with text and a checkbox. So I am going to separate those over here. I'm first going to work on the email section, or on the input text section. Next, I'm going to care about those two. So inside, I'm going to create a grid. That I will use to divide columns as follows. I need to set this to fit until half of the size of this overall container. So inside of this is that I am going to drop my input text, and I'm going to call it form or input text AW number 1. AIW number 1, perfect. And I'm noticing this is 50 pixels height with a border of this 6 gray. So I'm going to try to replicate that. But first, I'm going to set the spacing for this particular element to 0. My elements are by default having this 10 pixels margin at the bottom, so I'm going to set that to 0. Next, I'm going to set my height to 50 pixels. I'm going to set the borders to 2 pixels, and I'm going to use this gray that I suggested by the designer in this design. Also, I am having a 3 radio for this box, a 3 value radio, 3 pixels radio. So I'm going to use that as well. And here we are, almost there. Also, I'm going to check this text over here. This is bold, this is 60 pixels, and this is this sort of dark gray color. So what I'm going to do next is to use this. This is 60 pixels for the size of the text. However, the color itself will change if I go towards the selector and I set this to placeholder. Alright, so I set this to placeholder, and in there is that I'm going to place this color. Then I'm going to save as a swatch, by the way. And finally, I'm going to make this bold. I'm going to check the distance between this text and the walls of the container, and we're talking about 18 pixels. So I'm going to do 18 pixels over here, and we are done. Let me just get this to be an email field over here, and we are done. Perfect. So next, let's work on those two elements that are after the input field. We're having a 24 pixels, and I'm going to use 25 for the sake of having consistency over here, and I'm going to create a new element that I'm going to create, that I'm going to call form first tagline number 1. Let me get a little separation between those two elements, then 25 pixels will do. And I'm going to drop a text string over here, copy and paste. And here we are, perfect. 16 pixels for the size of the text. And let's set this to be named as form first tagline text. Perfect. Okay, so we are done with this one. Now let's create this order in here, for which we are going to use another div block to create our container for this form first checkbox. Okay, how are we going to do this? We're going to use a checkbox like this one over here, and we are going to name everything accordingly to its functionality. So checkbox field AW number 1 will go here. Checkbox AW number 1 will go over here, and finally we're having our label checkbox label number 1 in here. So this label will be 16 pixels size. It will be this color, and also it will say the following, like that. Perfect. Now our checkbox itself will follow this design over here, and this is getting interesting because we cannot directly modify this with CSS on Webflow. So we'll have to do some trickery that I will explain in a little bit. No, we are having this spacing over here of 16. I will round that up to 20 pixels. I really do not like to be that precise with those random measurements in here. I like to round everything to something that is making me feel a little better. And we're having a distance of 40 pixels between this element and the one that is following, like that. Perfect. Alright, so we are almost there. Very well. Now, the next step in our list is to create those items over here. So, I am going to use the very same formula that I used before. So at first I am going to create this a container that will wrap up the headline that I will call form. Let me call this form headline wrapper AIW number 1, on which I will drop off a headline like this one over here. Then it will transform into this your details. We're noticing this is a 22 size font size, and that we're using bold, and we're using this black color. So I'm going to try to replicate that after having a name for this form headline AIW number 1. I'm going to delete the default margins for this headline. I'm going to set this to 22 1.3 AM for the size, and I'm going to set the color for the swatch that I previously created. Copy and paste the text in here, and we're done. Next, let's get this outer's eye area of the formulary built. So if you pay attention, this is just the same that I created over here. The only thing, this is not having an additional form field here. It is only one, but I can reuse this element, and it will make total sense to reuse it because of those are equal. So we are just going to reuse our previously created grid. Alright, and we are going to create 4 elements for them like this. So this is first name, this is a plain text field. This is the last name. Next we're having a primary phone, which might be good to be a phone type of field, depending on what our developer is telling us about it. But let's assume that our developer will benefit in this, like that, a phone. And we are done here. Perfect. Now, what else do we have in here? Let's check this out. We're having almost everything. So, next step is let's create our third. Oh, I actually messed this up. I copied and pasted this in the third form area. It was supposed to be in the number 2 area, and here we are. Perfect. Nice. So I am going to repeat the formula for this headline, because if you paid an attention, this over here is following the very same styles as this headline over there, and those might be supposed to be the same class to share classes. They're hierarchy. They're sort of sharing the same hierarchy. So I'm going to reuse those elements in here. For that, I'm going just to copy and paste. That is about it. So I'm copying and pasting. Let me name this create password. And let me just have those two fields in here that will say that will be used for a password, like this. Password. Perfect. New password says actually. So new password it is. And here we have confirm a new password that I will create in a little bit. Okay. So let's now talk about this over here, this little I. This is a functionality that a developer is to code. However, how is that developer going to code it? The developer ideally will have two ledgers with icons. One for this I over here, and one with, say, the I a little darker or lighter. Or maybe another icon that is a different I over here. But anyways, it will indicate the states that are to be followed when a user clicks over here to discover or uncover or cover, I'm sorry, the password. So for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to limit this to be a lighter, slightly lighter I. But you know that you can just use whatever you might want, a different icon or a different color or whatever in the future. So I'm going to have that for this area of the exercise. Okay, so in order to create that, we are having several paths that we can follow. And the one that I'm going to follow right here is to create a div block that contains this input text. So I'm going to do something like input wrapper IW number 1. So notice that I'm going to set a position relative for this wrapper, and I'm going to drop my input text inside that wrapper. And what I'm going to do next is to create another div block that I will call input pass cover. And that input or that new field that I just created is going to be a position from static. It will go towards absolute, and it will be aligned to the right like this. Following, I will have this to be, say, it will be approximately 15 by 15 on which, that will do, and it will be index 3. Perfect. Now, I am not going to use this very same class for this element. This is a password input element that I want to be slightly different from those in here. I want to separate them. I do not want that whenever I change anything in here, like this color, those in here to be affected, because of the nature of those two is slightly different. So for convenience, I am going to separate those via duplicating the item. And now I'm going to call this input password, like this. So what I'm going to do next is to export this little picture over here. This little eye over here, I'm going to export it to use it as a background here. So I'm going to create a background, or I'm going to set the background property for this element. I'm going to set the tile to don't tile to don't repeat. Okay, so let's get this to be position right, don't tile, and let's use this eye over here. Perfect. Now for the size, maybe I am going to use 44 pixels. Yes, that is perfect. And here we are. Now for the input pass cover, I'm going to do a slightly similar trick. I'm going to set a background like that, don't tile, and I am going to export maybe a darker picture. I decided at the end to use a darker picture. That is of course something that our design is going to indicate us. But for the sake of getting the exercise done and to practice, which is why I'm doing this video, let's use this as a darker. I just want to show this a different state. So let's choose this darker picture over here. And let's set this to be 44 pixels height. And maybe I'm going to have two. Maybe I'm going to have those 2 pixels separation. That corresponds to the 2 pixels of the border of this container. So we are almost there. Now I am going to duplicate my input wrapper like that. Okay. And I'm going to check that this says confirm new password. I'm going to copy and paste that text over here. Now, here's what's going to happen. We're having a subclass in here that is going to be, say that our designer tells us, okay, I want dark to be the default, okay, and or I want, yes, I want dark to be the default. So we're going to have a subclass that says default over here. And that subclass we're going to set with a display block element. On the other hand, the standard non-default class will be hidden. And our developer will take care of the rest, having this subclass to be here or not, depending on the input that the user is having for this button, right? And finally, what we are going to do here is to have a cursor pointer over our button, so that whenever our whenever we are hovering over this, it indicates the user that this is something clickable, and that's pretty much it. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm not going to use display none, but I am rather going to use opacity to 0, and in here I'm not going to display block, but I'm going to set the opacity to be 100%, like that. Perfect. Okay, so we are done with our passwords. Next, let's go for this create an account item over here. And I'm going to set this to 40 pixels for separation. Next, I'm going to drop a formulary button in here, followed by 2 text strings. Yes, it is like that. So I am actually going to use rich text blocks because I am having links in here. So I'm going to use rich text blocks set to be, I'm going to name those rich text, or no, I'm going to call those submit tagline number 1 and submit tagline number 2. Those are going to be my rich text blocks. I'm going to copy and paste this over here, as well as I'm going to do the same with those in here. And that's it. Perfect. And I'm going to give some styles to my button. And having fixed 50 pixels over here, so my button will be 50 pixels. Hey, it will say create an account. Okay, and it will have a maxed width of the half of the container. So for this particular div, I'm going to set the width to be actually, I'm going to use, just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to use the very same approach that I had for the previous items. I'm going to create a form forward grid, or forward grid. That will be a grid layout with only one row. And I am going to have my items to be here. Just like that. Almost there. Also, I am going to create another container to contain my items, so that all of them gets to in one cell of this grid, like this. So back to my button, I'm having 18 pixels bold for the content in here. So I'm going to have 18 pixels wide and bold. Also, I'm noticing that this red is to be used for the background of this color. So I'm going to use that, and also I'm going to create a swatch to use that one. Finally, I'm going to get my button to cover the entire width of the container and to have a 3 pixels radio to follow this over here. And we're done with our button. Our button is having approximately 25 pixels separation to this item below, so I'm going to have this to follow a approximately 25 pixels separation. This text over here is 16 pixels, so I'm going to fold that in here as well. And I'm going to use 3.6 EM for the sake of having a little more separation between those paragraphs. Perfect. Also, I'm going to do so with this one over here. here we are. Now let's create some links, shall we? Terms and conditions. And let's have this link to go towards, I don't know, anywhere. The only thing we need right now is to give styling to those links, because by default, here is how they look like, but we should have them to look a little different. So we're going to set a selector for this link that is nested into the name of the class we have here. This will only work if we name our class. So after that, we're going to set the decoration to be still underlined, just in case our classes are overridden by a link non-underline for the entire body. And also we're going to set the color to be black, or this sort of black that we're using. Now for the element that is below, we're going to do almost similarly. We're having though a different color and we're having this bold, but the approach is kind of the same. So we're going to have this red and also bold. Finally, we are noticing that the distance between those two elements is approximately 40 pixels. So we're going to have those 40 pixels in here. However, our paragraphs are by default having 10 pixels as the spacing below them. And we're going to set that to 0. Notice what I did here. I clicked over the paragraphs inside of our rich text block. Next, I clicked over the selector, hit all paragraphs, and made sure to indicate the Webflow application to nest selector inside of my rich text block, so that only those paragraphs inside these elements are affected. The reason I do that is I do not want to affect everything on the website. And right now, this is an exercise that is only having those few elements. But say you're on an entire website and you do not want to modify everything up, just want to modify it a little, or your items. So this is what you should do to leave all of the other paragraphs in the website as they are. And here we are with our left side area. Finally, we're going to work on this. Perfect. So on our right main area, we are going to have a div block. We'll call sort of, let me see, this is some sort of informational block. So this is how I will call it. I'll call this info wrapper number 1. And this wrapper box is having a border with this color over here and a 3 pixels radio for all corners. So I'm having 3 pixels for the corners radius, and I will have a solid style for the borders, 1 pixel width, and this gray color that I will turn into a swatch so it will be used, so it can be used easily in the future if ever required. Also, I'm having a pattern of 40 pixels approximately. I created a pattern of 40 pixels in here. And next, I'm having 2 areas inside of this wrapper. The top one will contain a headline. The bottom one will contain a grid with some icons and text. So I will build a div block that I will call info top box or area, top area number 1. And also I'm going to create a info bottom area number 1 as well. So instead of this area of the top, I will drop up a text block that I will use to copy and paste this text over here. Now let's see what features this text is having. We're having 24 pixels for the text size, and it is regular. So info text, no, info top text number 1 is having 24 pixels size. I'll use 1.6 em, or no, maybe 1.3 is better. Okay, this is, yeah, it is better. 1.3 for the headline size. I am using a black, or sort of black, for the color, and that's it. It's regular, so I'm making sure this is regular or equals normal. That's it. Now, the distance between this element and the elements that are following is of approximately 30 pixels. So I'm having a space of 30 pixels as the bottom margin, but I'm not going to create that margin for the element that is inside the element that is going to be next to the following block. This is like I am rather creating margin for the elements that are in between each other, which in this case is info top area. So for info top area, I am going to have a 30 pixels margin at the bottom. Now for the outer container at the bottom, I am going to have a grid system with those items in here. This being said, let's drop up a div block that I'm going to turn into a info grid number 1, and it is going to be actually a grid. So I'm going to have a grid with one column only, with a distance of approximately 20 pixels in between rows, and inside of it I'm going to drop up a div block that will be turned out into a info grid item number 1. That's it. So that additional item will consist of 2 areas: a icon in the left side, and some text over here, text that is having a little or some words as bold. So I will use a rich text block. Now you might think about, but why aren't you using a standard block if you can just bold it? Well, in Webflow alone at least, you cannot do this bold thing on standard text boxes if you are a editor and you want that a lot of the content might be able to be edited by editors. Although this is well, it will all depends on what final usage of this structure will be, but let's say for the sake of getting accustomed to and getting used to build for editors, that this is something that a editor will edit. So I'm adding my grid and making this first column auto so that it is adapted to the size of the icon that I will drop inside. I will drop then in a picture that will be turned into an icon. Let me just get this exported. Perfect. So here's my icon. There it is. Perfect. So I'm having my icon. I'll call this info icon number 1. And yeah, that's fine, I think. Additionally, I'll create a container for that icon. So I'll call this info icon wrapper number 1. Now I'm going to drop my icon inside of it, and I just prefer to do that instead of having the icon alone into this grid system, because if I can do certain things like this one over here, I want to set the width of this item to be, let me see, I will have this to be 30 pixels, and this is basically the width that I'm having in between the border of that container and the text. Because if you'll notice that maybe all the icons aren't exactly the same and the same size. And indeed, for example, this icon over here is a little wider than those that are in there. So this is just sort of a measure, a safety measure that I'm taking over here. I'll have this to be width equal 30. You can do that as well by setting the size of the first column on the grid, but this is often more flexible for me. Now, info icon wrapper is the element that will be 30 pixels, and inside of it I will have the icons being approximately roughly 18 pixels. Hey, like this, and there we are, perfect. Now, on the other area of this grid, we'll have a let's call this info text wrapper, and this is a container containing my text that I told you before will be a rich text block. Now, if I have this rich text block over here, I will allow editors to have some areas bold, assuming a hypothetical, non-realistic scenario in which you're having editors. But anyways, this is just an exercise, right? So I'm going to name my rich text block as info item description, or info item text. That's better, perhaps. AW number 1. And this is going to be a 16 text size. 1.6 EM might be just nearby the design. Perhaps 1.4 will be better. Yes, that's kind of closer to my design. So I'm going to check this for making all HTML bolts that are inside or are nested inside of this rich text block class to have particular features, and that feature is it will be bold, and well, that's basically the only feature that I will work with in here. Now, as for the color, I'm going to make this color just to keep consistency, and that's it. It looks like the icons might be better to grow a little bit, so I'm making this 22 pixels to see if that is closer to our design. Yes, it looks like it is better that way. And maybe I'm going to have a little pen at the top. I'm just trying to visually get this as close as possible to the design. Now, this being done, I will just copy and paste more of those items to be able to have more in here. This is full, I think. Let me see. Yes, it is full. Perfect. Let me get this exported. Here we are. Let's go for the box icon, and here we are. Perfect. Copy and paste. Order history is bold, and this over here should be a box like that. Now this over there should be a truck icon, and that's it. It kind of looks similar, I think. Let me just have a quick quality check over here. Yeah, it kind of look similar. Perfect. So we are almost there. Now what is next? we're working on tablets as well. So for tablets, I'm going to reduce this margin for the main section to 40 pixels. I often use 40 pixels for those sections on tablets. What else can I do? I believe that tablets can, although mobile is like this, tablets can just continue to be this way. Yes, for a while it will just work. So what I'm going to do next is to reduce this text size. Over here I'm going to use 18 pixels. I'm going to reduce this margin to 25 pixels. Let me get this reduced to, oh, by the way, here's what it was different. I shouldn't have any sort of margin for columns over here. That's better. Okay, let's continue moving forward. Let's move forward. I will reduce this to 18 pixels because if I'm not having any sort of precise instructions from my designer to do this a specific way, I'm just kind of improvising over here. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to do, what am I going to do next? Let me just see. Okay, so that's pretty much it for tablets, I think. I'll reduce this to 14 pixels. Kind of look better, I think. Yeah, it will work. Now, let me go towards mobile landscape. And for mobile landscape, I'll start to configure some, not all, but some of the styles that are on my design for mobile, so that they are inherited to the following interface. So for this headline, I'm still having 32, so I'm just leaving it as it is. And having 16s, when this is not having pretty much any sort of variation, but I think that we are good to stack those elements in a different way for this layout. So what I'm going to do next here is to get rid of this columns, of those columns over there. So I'll edit the grid and I will delete one of those columns. Next, I will go towards this top main area and I will have my column span back to 1. Remember, when we were on desktop, we wanted this to take the equivalent to 2 columns on our grid because of this element was supposed to be covering all this top area. But for this interface over here, I want this to be back to 1 column span so that everything fits into one only column, and I am making my grid to be 1 column only. Okay, so this has been done. What I want to do next is to have this area over here, which is the right on my design on desktop, to be at the top after the create an account headline. And in order to do that, what I will do is select my top main area and order it as first. Okay, so I'll set a 1 number for this one over here. Now I want this left main area to be number 2, or number 3, or the last one. And finally, the right main area, I want this to be the number 2, or the one at the middle. And here we are. So just to recap, this one over here, number 1. This one over here, number 2. This one, number 3. This one over here, number 2. Assigned into our grid as number 2. So what else do we have here? Let me check this out. So we're getting rid of our boxed layout, so I am eliminating this padding, and also I'm getting rid of this border. And there we are. Also, this is 16 pixels for mobile. I want this to be inherited to to lay out on mobile, and we're having roughly 10 pixels in between those items in here. So I'm going to reduce the rows gap to 10 pixels, just like that. The distance between creating an account and the text that follows is 20 pixels, roughly 20 pixels. So I'm going to do that as well over here. I'm editing my grid and I'm having 20 pixels for rows. There we are. And I'll show the distance between those two elements changes. This is 20 pixels now. So I'm reducing this from 30 to 20. And I'm still doubting about that will be okay, but it seems like it is just working. Now for this email, I am just leaving it as it is as for now, because I'll make this to stretch over or to take an entire row on the following layout or breakpoint, which is mobile portrait. However, we do have a distance of approximately 40 pixels between this element and the following one. However, we made it 20 pixels with the grid. So what I'm going to do next is to take this top main area over here, this right main area, and to have a 20 pixels margin towards top, so that this is approximately 40 pixels total. And there we are. Yes, I think we're good now. Now for dirt details, we're having 20 pixels towards the elements in the bottom, so I'm reducing this from 40 to 20 pixels. Similarly, I am reducing from 40 to 30 pixels in between those items over here and the create password items in the bottom. This text size is 22. Let me check if this is 22. Yes, it's still 22. We're having 16 for the texts inside, and here is 16 as well. So nothing changes in there. Create an account, create an account. Perfect. What we can do though is to have those rows over there to fit the entire row like this. By eliminating one column, I can do this to be like that. And I believe this is pretty good. Maybe just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to reduce this margin from 40 to 20 pixels, the margin between those two elements. And there we are. Let's go for our final layout. Over here, let me work on the equivalent of a iPhone 7 layout. Now, for email, we are taking the entire space on the container. So what we can either drag this to be like that, or we can just change the columns layout to get to be one column. So that is what I'm going to do. And the reason why is that if I do so, if I modify this form first grid like that, I will not only change this element, but also 3 elements on this page, which are those in here. Those are the good things about sharing classes between elements that are having things in common that you know you can exploit later on, like in this situation. So this being said, I think we are pretty close to being done. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so what else can we do here? Maybe I took a look to not modify this before. So the distance between this button and the element that follows is kind of smaller on mobile currently to this design. I like it better differently, but I'll just stick to what the design is doing here. So yes, definitely. And let me just have things to be the way it is on the design. And this is Perfect. There we are. There we are. Perfect. Now, we're only having left this checkbox over here. This one is tricky. You cannot modify this specific layout with only CSS properties over here. So what you're required to do is kind of having a masked trick that I will try it out on a new video.